So this is the second part of enterprise and entrepreneurs. So you can see this is the same sort of slide that I spoke about the first time. These are the elements that are in the syllabus. So highlight them, make sure that you're satisfied that by the time you get to the end of this topic, I've done something in the slides, or I've done something in class to be able to answer these topics. Okay, so I spoke before about entrepreneurs starting up a business because they could see a gap in the market. And really, these gaps in the market probably come about because different groups in society have different needs and wants. So there are 4 groups that we must look at. Alternatively, there are some other groups that really you should be just as able to answer. So if we look at different groups in societies, we could talk about learners. So that would be not necessarily just everybody of school age, but it could be people who go to university. Remember that you don't have to do these kind of things full time. There's lots of part-time studiers as well. And then we'll have different needs and wants. So if I didn't call you learners and called you young adults, you could be a different category, because remember, young adults could be in training as well. And perhaps, I suppose, it might include anybody, I don't know, up to the age of 25, let's say. And there will be some people in that category that are no longer learners, but employees or business owners. You might have a young couple. You could have a young couple with children. You could just as easily have a mature couple with teenagers, let's say. I don't know. Shall we classify them as different? You don't just necessarily have to have couples, though. You could have a single female or a single male. And they could represent young or older. And of course, I've written a pensioner couple, but you could just as easily have a single pensioner themselves. So we've got to try and look at their needs and their wants. So needs are essential. So I don't know, does everybody in society need things like clothing, a roof over the head, a nice environment, food, but wants are very different then, because some wants you could do without. Well, let's say, for instance, I could be a learner and you might want, I don't know, some sort of tablet, MacBook, laptop, something like that. You don't need that, but you could want that, and lots of people want that in order to, so you think about why they want it. So a lot of people want these things in order to improve their learning experience, to learn from a wider variety of sources, to produce something on it. And so you can see how businesses will be there to satisfy their needs and wants. So let's say, for instance, let's try and split the column into needs and wants, and come up with a couple of needs and wants for each person, each society group, and then we'll share some ideas and we'll look at businesses that satisfy those needs and wants. Factors of production are almost, it's a term, it's like a bit of theory. So there are 4 factors of productions, and businesses will use them to satisfy the needs and wants of customers. So you need to know about each factor. I'm just taking them in this order. It's not a specific order, it's just how I've written it. So one of the factors of production is land. So what is land? Land is classed as all natural resources, such as the land itself, so what you stand on, but it also includes the natural and mineral resources, so all of the plants that grow on the land. It includes the sea, so you've got fish. It includes animals that are on the land, so that would be livestock. And then, of course, you get things like coal and oil and gravel, and they all come from the land in one form or another. So you can see how lots of businesses require that, even if it's only the land itself upon which to build your building. We'll move on to labour next then. Now, labour comes in two elements. The first is the physical element, and the second is the mental effort the people involved in producing the goods and services. So remember that they might be doing things, and there might be some thought element in there as well. So two different bits. The third factor of production is something called capital. Now, capital has many different definitions in business studies. So this definition is the capital in relation to the factors that are used in production. So capital in this sense includes goods that are made in order to produce other goods. So that all sounds a bit funny, but let's think about what you need in order to produce something. So if you're a factory, you might have the factory building itself, you might have the machinery and the equipment that goes in it. So that will also be the same for offices and shops. And then you could think about all the things that go inside offices, furniture, equipment, display things that go in shops, shelving, anything along that sort of elements. So it's what we would call goods that help us to produce other things. It's likely that you keep them for a longer period of time. So there's no usable element, if you like. And the last section, here's this word enterprise again. So I'm giving you a different definition just to consider all of these things. So enterprise is the act of bringing together all of the factors of production in order to create goods and services. It is carried out by entrepreneurs whose reward is the profit made from these activities. So perhaps the most technical of definition there. Will all of these factors be used in the same weighting of all of the enterprising activities that we do? No, each business will have a different commodity. They will have different factors as their most important thing. Remember that the businesses that we're talking about can be businesses who make and sell goods or who provide a service. In order to illustrate how there's different factors of production, we've got to section off the business world. And these are the easiest ones. So again, it's a key term, write them in your vocabulary book. So we have the primary sector. That's almost like when it comes from the land, it comes from the ground. So we described land in a factor of production as using plants or livestock, fish, coal, oil. So if you look at the examples, the primary sector extracts raw materials, farming, fishing, forestry, any of those. Secondary sector is just a posh way of saying the manufacturing industry. In manufacturing, the making of something is almost easier, if you like it. And then the tertiary sector, you would recognise it as the retail sector or the service sector, anything that provides a service. Or don't forget the school that you're sitting in today, the hospitals, the police, anything like that. So I suppose I'm sort of saying to you, we might look at different business scenarios and they might be placed in a different sector of the economy, which will result in the fact that they will use different factors of production and they will have more importance depending on the sector that we're involved in. Okay, so the first thing that you could do here is you could try and look at all of the categories of industrial sectors, and you could begin by sectioning them off into the primary sector, the secondary sector and the tertiary sector. from that, we're going to try and link back to this idea. Remember, it's about small, medium business enterprises. So if you look at this, we can begin to see the percentage of that industry. So the red is the percentage of the industry noted, which percentage is made up of small and medium enterprises. Remember, small enterprises less than 50 people, medium enterprises less than 250 people. So what percentage, the green is what percentage of people are employed in that industry by a small or medium enterprise. And then the blue is in relation to turnover. Remember that I just said that was another word for revenue, and that was the amount of money made from the sales of the goods or services and belonging to the small medium enterprises. So let's say, for instance, I'm just going to jump in so we're going to try and draw conclusions. That's what we're going to do from this. So if I said to you, let's say for instance, I'm going to go for G, only because it says repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles. So I want you just to think in our local area. So how many garages do you know that are perhaps independents? They are 1 man, 2 man, 3 man. Excludes the man, but how many people maybe are employed, less than 5 or something like that? Maybe a lot of people work by themselves. It's a good trade where a lot of people do work by themselves, but then you can compare it to perhaps more chains. So you could perhaps note down a couple of I know some of the major retailers there. Often when you get a title slide in the middle, I'm giving you an indication that we're moving on to something a little bit unique here. So this is looking at the stakeholders who will affect the business. So it's a very business term, but you'll know, you're a consumer, you've shopped before, and you'll get the idea of this. Let's look then. What is a stakeholder then? This is a definition. I haven't put it as a key term, but I would like to see you move this into your vocabulary book. So I've said it's a group or an individual that's affected by or has an interest in the operation and objectives of the business. I'm going to strip that right back and say it's a group or an individual that has an interest in a business. Okay? So, I've tried to put lots of different sections here, and some of them go in internal and external, and then I've got this connected groups who depend on a business. So, if we look at it, I've tried to think of the different terms that these stakeholders would be that are inside the business. So it could be directors, or it could be managers, or it could be employees. It really depends on the business itself, because often some businesses are only small, so there might just be employees. You might get a little bit of a bigger business and you might still be in one premises and you might have one manager and some employees. Unless you're a company, you're highly unlikely to have any directors. They'll only be relevant for a company. Okay, so start to think right now as we're describing them. Why are these going to be interested in a business? So if I move on to the connected ones then, shareholders are only stakeholders of companies again. And a shareholder is just a posh way of saying they own the business, they've invested the money in the business, they don't do any of the day-to-day running, but they'll be interested in for other reasons. And you can have customers, so me and you, Joe Blogs, the general public, we will all be customers at some point in our lives. You could be a supplier to a business. We could be advisors and consultants, so perhaps they might go together. They may come from the bank, or they could be independent. They might offer you some advice or information. Then, of course, our competitors. Now, these could be direct competitors, or they could be indirect. Perhaps they offer a complementary product or something that wouldn't exist if our product didn't exist. And then we can think about the government, the external ones. So we have the government. Obviously, they're very interested in how much money a business makes, how many people are employed, if it's going to continue. You can have the local community. That's still quite important for a lot of businesses because we want to think about our reputation, and our local community might, in fact, give us some valuable employees. We could have pressure groups, so you might have heard of Greenpeace. So activists that perhaps have they have a viewpoint and they want us to share it. And then of course you can have the media, and these groups will all be interested in businesses for a variety of reasons. It's quite common then that you'll be asked about how powerful a member, a stakeholder group or individual is. And really, you've got to understand the relationship between them. So you've got to think about, has the business any control over this? Or is the stakeholder group so big that the business will go along with whatever the stakeholders want? Let's take that further in the next. So in order to help you along here then, we've got our group of stakeholders. What about writing a little definition about if they're internal or external, or if they're connected next to the stakeholders? So let's look at shareholders then. We invest our money in a business. Remember, it's got to be a company, and we're going to be interested in things like, is the business making any profit? Because the profit will allow us to perhaps get a dividend. It's a reward. It's a thank you. It's almost like saying, thank you very much for investing your money with us. We hope to use it again in the future. Please don't take it away from us. And obviously, shareholders have purchased a share. That's their investment. And over time, I think shareholders would hope that the share price would go up so that they would get a return. Now, how can they be powerful then? Well, shareholders elect the board of directors. They're ultimately responsible. So if shareholders aren't satisfied with the way that the business is working, remember it's a company, we could sack the directors. If we move on to banks and other lenders, right, so we're going to say they're only really interested if you want some money from them. So there's two elements if you get a loan from them. The principal amount is the actual loan amount, and then the interest obviously could be fixed or variable, and it's what you pay over and above. And obviously we've got something like a credit rating. So when you borrow money, if you haven't managed to keep up the repayments in the past, your credit rating will be very poor. And if you've always made your repayments, your credit rating will be very high. What kind of power do the banks and other lenders have then? They can enforce loan covenants. So loans are usually secured on buildings or something that you're purchasing with it, a factory item or something. And so we can withdraw that. We can take ownership of it. And on a more day-to-day scale, it's likely that you'll have an overdraft facility, and the bank can withdraw that at any time. Directors and managers then. So directors and managers get paid, so they get a salary. They might have some enhancements, so they might have share options at the end of the year if they've done their job well. Obviously, the status of being a director or a manager, when people say, oh, who do you work for? And job satisfaction, so the pleasure of seeing everything the business do very well. So what kind of power do you have? They might make decisions that satisfy their needs more, and they may not primarily be in the interest of everybody else. So let's say, for instance, directors and managers could give themselves a really big salary rise. That sounds really good. However, shareholders wouldn't be very happy about that because salaries are paid out of profit. So there's some conflicting interest there. If you look at employees, they're almost the same, but we'll just go straight to their power. So employees can vote with their feet. If they're not happy, they can get their trade union involved, and they could have some industrial action, maybe some strikes that will give you very poor media coverage, and your reputation might not be very good. Obviously, to the other extreme, they could just find a job somewhere else, and so that will impact what we call staff turnover, number of people leaving the business. Suppliers then, so remember they're connected, they're really external to the business. Let's say for instance, suppliers want to sell you as much as possible. They want you to pay quickly at the right time, but they want to guarantee their business, if you like, because if you're struggling and they perhaps supply you 80% of their output, they could suddenly find themselves in lots of problems. So what kind of power do they have? Well, they could offer you a discounted price, or they could charge you an inflated price. It's very much up to them what the quality of their product is. And obviously, if you're known for being really high quality, you can only accept seconds. And obviously product availability. So let's say for instance, customer rings you and says, I'm desperate for X number of, I don't know, bit 1, you ring your supplier and say, can you deliver that to us? And they say yes or no. That'll obviously lead to customer satisfaction or customer dissatisfaction for you. Is it good, do you think, to have lots of different suppliers? Or is it good to just have one supplier? When we look at our customers then, they're on the opposite side, external to the business, but very much connected. So we're all customers. You want to know, is it a reliable product? What about the quality? Is it high quality? Is it low quality? Did I get value for money? If I pay £1, my expectations are far less than if I've paid £10 for the same thing. How available is the product? How many times will you return somewhere to find the shelf empty? Will you change where you purchase? And obviously customer service. So if I've got a problem, I want to be able to go back. I want to feel that you've listened to me, that I'm getting good customer service. What kind of power then? So word of mouth recommendations, especially now with the use of the internet. Let's look at TripAdvisor. Customers write their feedback, their responses, businesses can respond to it. But what if people write a whole load of rubbish about you? What if people go about bad-mouthing your business? That would absolutely be dire, the consequences. Look at our local community then. So we might be getting jobs from them. Could be about environmental. Do you want smells, lots of emissions coming into the air? What kind of is the local impact? So it could be that there's HGV lorries driving back and forth every day. Do you want that? Do you want them to accept deliveries at night time for the noise level? And so what kind of power and influence do they have? Well, they have power indirectly, so they can go to the local council and they can voice concerns, they can put in comments for the planning. And then we have our government. So they want to know that you're operating legally, that you've registered your business for tax purposes, because that means that they can generate income. And obviously they want to know that you can provide jobs, because if people aren't in jobs, then they'll require to claim benefit. So make sure that you kind of power do they have? They can make sure that you follow the regulations. So let's say, for instance, that your shop premises is the right temperature through legislation. We can give you some subsidies if you're perhaps in an area of low employment. We could give you tax breaks for a new business. and we could help you with planning to make sure that your council goes ahead with things. So one of the important questions that you need to get your head around is we're almost always going to have conflicting interests for our stakeholder groups. So you've got to try and work out which stakeholders are affected and which ones have more power over each other. So it's really about the equality that they have. So I've tried to sort of put down a few things to sort of help you out. So for shareholders then, a shareholder with a larger percentage is bound to have a greater influence than a shareholder with a smaller stake, because let's say for instance, if each shareholder, if 1% is one share, then obviously 100 shares, 100%. You can see how that can go. Banks have more impacts where you're struggling for cash. So if you're a cash-rich firm, you don't really need to think about your bank. They'll probably just give you advice about how to invest it to generate the best amount. Right, customers then. Obviously, when we're thinking about customers, we're thinking about ourselves. So you look at the shops in the high street and there are hundreds of thousands of customers to each shop. But if you're a manufacturing business, you might only have one customer. And so you could see that, let's say manufacturing business, I can produce, 100,000 widgets in a week. If you had a customer that only asks for 10,000 widgets, that's quite a small scale customer. But if you had a customer that ordered 50,000 of your widgets, you can see how that's nearly half of your capacity output. They would have a much greater influence. So you're trying to find out exactly how many customers has the business got and which kind of stake are you buying from them. If you have lots of outlets across the country, local community will be less relevant because you'll have lots of local communities. Whereas if there's only one outlet that you have, the local community is fairly small then, and they can be much greater. They can have a much greater impact. Governments exercise relatively little influence on many well-established and competitive business. Do things like regulation of the market, so to make sure that you get a good deal as a customer, that they're not overcharging you when they don't need to. So you might have heard some stories, particularly gas and electricity, the energy. There's always investigations going on about them. Then we could consider in this last few years things that where the government has a direct stake. So we still own some of Royal Bank of Scotland after the banking crisis. So you have a stake there, and they could perhaps influence that business, if not industry. And then employees, traditionally, if they were in the trade union, they had more power. That was because it's called collective bargaining. So it's the voice of the ranks in comparison to the voice of one individual. You can see how they could have a greater influence. So the questions when you look at the business is you've got to try and think, well, who is the stakeholder? How much influence do they have? Will it always be like that, or in the future will it change?